Tiger Woods was in a massive one-car accident. And while he's super injured, he's going to be okay. Will he make a comeback? Well, to me, Tiger Woods' story actually has something to say for all of us and our country and how divided we are. It's Rob Nelson Live. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Rob Nelson Live Wednesday half-hour show, streaming to you, coming from Florida, streaming to you everywhere. Facebook, YouTube, Reddit, Instagram, Twitch, you name it, Periscope. We're there. Share, follow, engage. This is all about creating a conversation. I love having you here with me. Thanks for being part of it. So, Tiger Woods, and today's show is going to probably not go where you think it's going to go, but I'm starting with Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods is one of the most well-known athletes in the world. If you go back to, when he won his first Masters, the first black man in a sport that was so white. I mean, up until the 1980s, there were caddies. Caddies were black in golf. There were no black golfers. And to win a Masters, and he just inspired people. And he became, in the late 90s, he became one of the most well-known people in the world. Not just as a sports figure. He became, he was up there with Michael Jackson, more well-known than any president ever. Yesterday, he's in a tragic car accident. Well, not tragic in that he lived, but tragic for his career. He's driving his car, races down a hill, something happens, it flips, and they use the jaws of life to get him out. And the whole world suddenly, if I were to ask anybody out there, what happened today in the hearings on Capitol Hill about the riots, some of you would know. Most people would be like, no, what happened? Do you know what happened in Rochester with the grand jury not finding the police officers guilty in the incident with the man they pulled the spit hood over and he died, the black guy they arrested last year? Some people, yes, most of you be no. Do you know what happened with Tiger Woods? Yeah, absolutely. Everybody knew what happened with Tiger Woods. Everybody. So why? And by the way, let me just say, Tiger Woods, was in Los Angeles to host a golf tournament. He couldn't play in the tournament because he just had his 5th back surgery. The guy's had more surgeries on his back, and he was at the top of the game. Then his life kind of came apart a little bit. He had an affair, a divorce, his back, the injuries. Was he going to make a comeback? Then a couple years ago, he makes a comeback, and now he's still trying to make that comeback. And he's on with CBS's Jim Nantz, and Jim asks him, are you gonna make it to the Masters in April? And Tiger Woods says this. We got a quote of this. Tiger Woods says, Crafty, pop the quote up. Tiger Woods says, God, I hope so. I've got to get there first, Woods said in the interview. A lot of it's based on my surgeons and doctors and therapists and making sure I do it correctly. This is the only back I've got. I don't have much more wiggle room left. That back can't take any more surgeries. And then the next morning, he shatters his leg. And that leg is like, he's like the $6 million man from that leg down now, right? There's going to be pins in his leg and his ankle. And, and with that swing that he has, that power, seriously, will he come back? I don't know. And people are going to root for Tiger to make a comeback. But here's the thing. Why are we so obsessed with the Tiger Woods type scenario? Remember a year ago when Kobe Bryant died, and we were obsessed with that. Everybody knew where they were when Kobe died. Princess Di, same thing. Decades ago, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy. Why do we get so obsessed when these celebrities, these famous people die? Or when they're in a tragic accident like what happened to Tiger Woods? Is it some of them, like the Tom Brady's, are like charmed? Everything seems to always go right. Others, like Princess Di, are kind of charmed and tragic at the same time. And Kobe, charmed until his death. JFK, charmed and tragic. Tiger Woods, still alive, thank God, but charmed and tragic, more stuff happening in his life. And to me, that represents two sides, two base sides of human nature. And this is where I'm going to go with this today. One side is our aspirational side, the desire, the aspire to be better, to be more, to be great, to watch greatness, to admire greatness, the perseverance it takes, the commitment, the dedication, and what you have to give. And the transformation that has on so many people, whether it's JFK, Princess Di, or Kobe Bryant, or Tiger Woods. The other side is a part of us that turns when we see a car wreck. The fascination with tragedy, the obsession with it. The Kennedy mystique was all built on tragedy. It's the two sides of human nature, the aspirational, and to me, the tragedy, which is the fear. And this says a lot about us, our future, how divided we are, and the role that social media plays in uniting us and dividing us. On that note, Facebook backed down. Yep. Remember we talked last week about Facebook, banning, or Monday, Facebook banning, no, it was Friday. Sorry, last Friday, Facebook banning all news content in Australia. And they played a hard ass move because Australia was going to put a requirement that they had to pay news content, news sources for this stuff. And Facebook was like, we're going to block all news sources, period, across the globe. No one can see any news from Australia, and Australia can't see news from anywhere. Well, Facebook blinked. Facebook backed down. Sure, there was a little bit of a they're going to change some of the rules in the law a little bit to make it a little more favorable. They're saving face. Facebook blinked. They backed down. There was so much pressure. I mean, literally the G7 summit of all the major, Western economic powers, it was virtual summit this year, came together and we're all talking about it. They were all talking about what Facebook did. The European Union and American legislators in Congress started immediately putting bills out in motion to create antitrust conditions that would allow small news companies in the US to work together as a group to compete in bargaining against Facebook. This is what the European Union Commission president had to say about what's happening. She said, we just can't leave decisions which have a huge impact on our democracies to computer programs without any human supervision or to the boardrooms in Silicon Valley. Interesting, right? We've talked about this. You can't just let computers make these decisions, or these massive corporations make these decisions that affect all of us. And Facebook realized they'd overstepped, and they were like, oops, we got to step back. But here's the thing that, to me, this all leads to. It's not really about the Facebook ban per se, although it's interesting because some of you talked to me when we did this show about how Facebook, you felt, get your news from somewhere else. Monkey Arms, one of our regular listeners, who I don't know if he's with us tonight, but said, get your news from somewhere else. And I said, it's not just about getting your news. It's not just where you get your news. That's what people depend on it for. But here's what happened. When Facebook put that ban in place, what happened instead was all kinds of misinformation. Yeah, like literally the real news went away, the fake news came in, and they found a massive increase in sites that didn't get pulled down, that peddled in QAnon conspiracy theories, child pedophilia conspiracy theories, that the Australian government, just like they have about the US, the QAnon theories that they've got pedophile rings going on. All kinds of alt-right groups saw their traffic fly up because they didn't technically get blocked as news organizations. So you saw all kinds of bad misinformation, continuing to come out. A guy named Avi Yamini, who's a alt-right activist, all kinds of crazy hate speech stuff in Australia. His 100,000 followers kept seeing more and more. And The Guardian, has what they call their hate factory investigation, found all kinds of these extreme alt-white groups saw their content still proliferating. So when you took real news away, all the crazy stuff stayed out there. My point is, this media isn't, the social media isn't going away, first of all. But second of all, I think we've narrowed the focus down. We look at it in too small a format. I mean, if you think about it, social media is a driver of change, both the best change and the worst change in the world at some level. I mean, just take for a second, look at the positive social change that social media has triggered. In the United States alone, Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, neither one of those could have happened. Wouldn't have had a chance of happening without social media. Around the globe, all kinds of Hong Kong, the political protests, the protests against the presidential election in Iran, Arab Spring. All of these were massive social movements that social media triggered, and activists used social media to spread their techniques to other activists around the world. I mean, social media has been a driver, social platforms, for massive positive social change that never would have happened ever without them. Social media has also been responsible for a lot of crazy bad stuff, whether it's, the obsession with people posting on Instagram, their pictures, the pettiness, the Twitter hate wars, the stop the steal kind of stuff, and the QAnon conspiracies, all of that. And of course, my favorite, cancel culture. All of that's the bad driven by social media. As a sidebar, I just have to say two funny sidebars on cancel culture. The CPAC, the Conservative Political Convention, which Donald Trump is going to come speak at the end of this week in Florida and announce whatever he's doing next, canceled Pharaoh, the singer, because he had super anti-Semitic views that they found out. And so, of course, people are having a great time pointing out how, their whole event, CPAC's event, it's called something like not canceling, like how, the backlash to canceling. And it's like they're canceling people. But my favorite is the Muppets. The Muppets, the Disney has put a content warning on certain episodes of the Muppets because there's offensive content in some episodes. And they put a warning up, and you could go, what the heck? And that was my first reaction. Like, are you kidding me? They're doing a content warning like on the Muppets? It's a little crazy. And I'm not going to dig too deep into it other than to say this. Disney actually said, we're not going to pull these episodes down. We think what they say is bad. We think what they talk about isn't good. And we're not going to just leave them up there with no content warning, but we're going to tell you something. We're putting them up so you can look, learn, see why they might not be right, and start more discussion, which actually is a good thing because we should be having discussion about things that are controversial, not just pulling them down. But I digress a little bit. Social media does the good and the bad. And here's the reality of it, right? There was an inevitable progression. We can hate social media, but there was an inevitable progression that was moving us toward this. I mean, Microsoft kind of started it, and then Apple jumped in behind it. And Microsoft and Apple created technologies that made things accessible to us in a way that they never were accessible before. They united the world in a unique way. I mean, Apple's technology was all designed. Steve Jobs was a visionary, designed with the message of creating, things that were customized to you, the ability to personalize your technology, increase your privacy, increase what you want to get out of life, make your life better through technology. And Microsoft did the same thing. I mean, I actually sat years and years ago when Microsoft was just launching with Ken Nishi, one of the founders of Microsoft. I was super young, just out of college, and one of the founders of Microsoft, Ken Nishi, sat with me and told me, this was before, it was really at the beginning of Microsoft, how the whole world was going to be united by computers and people were going to be able to communicate in a way they never had before through technology, desktop to desktop. I thought he was crazy. He actually asked me to give $5,000 or $10,000 to put in his company, not because he needed the money. He didn't need the money. He's like, I'll make you a rich man. I didn't believe him. I didn't believe that what he was saying would happen. And Microsoft was nothing. Nobody knew about it. It was literally just going public. Well, I made a big mistake because that investment would have been worth, probably like $100 million today. But Ken Nishi is the one who convinced Bill Gates and the rest of the founders not to sell to IBM for $50 million and said, we keep this, we'll be billionaires. We're going to change the world. My point is these technologies, Apple, Microsoft, they created a way for us to communicate with a potential for change that was literally infinite. And Facebook was a logical extension of that. Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, social, all kinds of social platforms. I mean, Facebook, the community aspect was a logical outgrowth of those platforms, a way for us to create a community, right? To kind of come together. And that's what it originally started to do, to create a larger way for us to interact, to customize technology for us, but to have a way of communicating and communicate in a social way that made our universe bigger, expanded it, and in the most, utopian sense, brought us somewhere we could never go before. Unfortunately, it also kind of took us in a place we never wanted to go before. When you look at COVID right now, right? Look at how ripped up we are by COVID. How is it, and social media is a big part of that. How is it COVID is a disease that's politicized? How is it not united us? The world is all in one pandemic. It ain't like some of us are in the pandemic. The whole world's in it. I mean, the ultra elites may shield themselves from it, but we're all in it. And yet you'd think it's bring us together. But it doesn't bring us together. It's actually we've divided ourselves. We've got, you've got two sides. You've got the anti-lockdown people. You've got the anti-mask people. You've got the anti-vaccine people. And then you've got the go all in people on the other side. And instead of finding a common ground, we just divide and hate. I mean, what world do we live in where people would go out, whether you believe in masks or not, and put a mask on and not put a mask on because somebody feels uncomfortable without it? Instead of putting it on and doing the nice, kind thing in a pandemic, you go, I'm going to punch you in the Walmart for making me put a mask on. I mean, social media has triggered that. Social media has triggered that divide, that hate between us, right? I mean, the best example is Trump. Trump took social media and went next level. He was the first president, the first public figure to ever take the social platform, in his case, Twitter, and turn it into a megaphone that made his reach so wide, so vast, and so impactful that every world leader started using Twitter as a way to communicate. Everybody did. Trump saved Twitter. Trump literally used Twitter to create the largest megaphone we've ever seen. He was a master at using social media. The problem is Trump was a divider. Trump used the negative side of what I say, the aspirational, and then the negative side. Trump used the negative. Trump used hate. Trump used all hate. That was Trump's MO. Divide us with fear. Divide us with hate. You can say you like things Trump did, whatever. Trump was a divider. He didn't want to unite. He wanted to spread as much fear and anxiety as he could. And that megaphone worked. And it created a backlash on the left. I'm not saying the left, wasn't doing its own thing, but it created a backlash there. So we divided into two sides, throwing hate at each other, fear, fear, fear. And both sides driven by hate and fear. Trump drove fear, not aspiration. And the left, increasingly in the cancel culture, drives fear, not aspiration. Now let's figure this out and come together. And both claim there's an aspirational aspect, but it's not. Trump wasn't aspirational. Trump didn't, he said, we'll make America great again, but that's not aspirational. He said, basically, we're all in trouble. Be afraid of this, that, and the other thing. And on the other side, the left doesn't go, hey, they say we all want to be inclusive, but it's like kind of like you guys are all evil and bad. 70 million people voted for Trump are all bad and need to be canceled. Both sides are driving fear, not aspiration. But what if Trump had been aspirational? What if a leader like Trump was an aspirational leader? If instead of a hater, instead of a divider form, we've had aspirational leaders before. They had much smaller platforms. MLK, Martin Luther King, great example. But he didn't have the social media platform yet. He had, 1 million people show up for his I Have a Dream speech. And, you should watch his I Have a Dream speech. I'm not going to play a clip of it here because I tried, but you can't really condense MLK's speech down to a soundbite. It doesn't really work. It's all built in that cadence of like, I have a dream that one day this will happen. And I have a dream that one day that, and he sort of builds it out. But part of MLK's dream was one day in Georgia, black and white boys and girls would be able to hold hands and come together. And Georgia was at the time driven, with George Wallace, the governor, who was a avowed racist. You know what? That dream actually happened. We've got a long way to go on race. But that dream happened. You watch the protests, you watch America today, black and white kids and adults were holding hands in Georgia. He was aspirational. So was John F. Kennedy. Like him or not like him for many ways as a president, he was the first truly telegenic, aspirational American president, and it inspired a nation. Much of whatever he did or didn't do personally, JFK inspired a nation and inspired that he was the trigger for so much of what happened. I put together two quick little bits. I'm full disclosure. I've condensed. These are condensed. I didn't do it. These are two condensed pieces from two speeches JFK gave. One was his super inspirational space speech when he talks about not when we go to the moon, that's in 69, but when we're going to go to the moon, the beginning, early 60s, we're going to go to the moon. And the second is the inauguration speech where he has his, famous line about ask not what you can do for you. Ask not what your country can do for you. And again, Keep in mind, this is on a radio address. You know, it's old. It sounds, but listen to the aspiration of this little 30-second bite of these two speeches.
Choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
I mean, it's powerful, right? And the setup to the space speech, I'm going to take a comment here. If Trump was, we didn't have a lot of comments today, but thank you guys who are on it. If Trump was aspirational, they would have assassinated him already. You know what? It's an interesting point. You know, I'm going to jump on that for a second because that may sound crazy to some people, but years ago, I was at the house of a guy named Richard Goodwin, who's now dead, but his wife was Doris Kearns Goodwin, and she's the Pulitzer Prize winning biographer, close to the Obamas. She wrote the biography of Lincoln. And Goodwin was a close aide to both Robert Kennedy and John F. Kennedy. And Kennedy got assassinated. He became very, very close to Robert Kennedy. MLK's assassination, he's still very close to Robert Kennedy. He's sitting in his house, this is years later, with me, drinking brandy and smoking a cigar with me. And he tells me this story, how Robert Kennedy realized. And remember, Robert Kennedy, I don't know if you know, Robert Kennedy was the most aspirational of the Kennedys in his own personal life. You know, he had those famous quotes like, you know, a drop in the water creates a ripple, which creates a ripple and a ripple and a ripple and changes the world. And he said to Richard Goodwin, you know, I realize now, because their father, Joe Kennedy, had driven them as political machines. And to some extent, JFK was that, even though he became representative as an aspirational figure. But RFK says, I realize that I can change the world, that I really can actually light a flame that makes all the difference for millions of people. And then he said, that or someone's going to assassinate me first, because he was on the bid to run for president. He would have almost for sure been elected. A week later to a day, he's assassinated in Los Angeles, and Richard Goodwin's with him. Richard Goodwin goes off and becomes a drunk and lives in New Hampshire for 5 years, just like, I can't take it anymore. But to your point, they might assassinate an aspirational president. But nonetheless, just imagine for a second, if Trump had been aspirational, what would it be like? And then imagine for a second, if we had an aspirational leader, because the fact that he wasn't, Trump didn't start the divide. Trump exploited the divide. The divide was there, and social media is going to let us divide or come together. Here's the reality. You can't go back. You can look the other way. You can check out of social media. You can say, I'm not going to pay attention. You can say, I'm not going to get my news from that. People shouldn't get their news from that. I'm not going to pay attention to it. Who cares if it's being used to cancel? It's being used to cancel people. I'm not going to pay any attention. I got bigger things for it. You can say that. But it is driving the course of human progress for better or worse. There is no going back. This isn't I Dream of Jeannie. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. The genie's out, and we deal with it one way or the other. It either destroys us or we figure out how to use it in a way that unites us and brings us together. It's that simple. There's no alternative. It's not going away. It's not going to stop. And, you know, look, are we screwed? Is human nature, just the base side of human nature, always going to just come out? The worst of us is going to come out. The Karens are going to come out no matter what we do. And we're just going to have more and more Twitter hate wars. And we're going to have, you know, Joe Biden's not either, right? Joe Biden's not an aspirational president. He's also not a Trump. He's just, you know, he's a placeholder. I'm sorry. I hope things work. They're already running into problems left, right, and center on trying to get stuff done. And I said the other day, he's trying to be a moderate, and it's going to fail. Congress is going to deadlock on it. It's not going to make change. That's okay. A couple of years will go by. People wanted to get rid of Trump so badly, they would have put anyone in. Biden's not the aspirational president. You can go, oh, but he calls for unity. That's not an aspirational president. An aspirational president is somebody who truly inspires you, truly inspires, lifts you. When you listen to Martin Luther King, when you listen to Bobby Kennedy, when you listen to John F. Kennedy, we're inspired then and now. You don't get inspired listening to Biden. People did get worked up listening to Trump, but not inspired. Again, not aspirational. But if you were aspirational, if we had an aspirational leader, we could have. One can still come along. Think what it could do. Think what an aspirational leader using that kind of social media could do. Think what we all could do if we started committing to using social media in an aspirational way. It's not going to happen overnight. Again, are we screwed because the worst of us will take over? Plus the algorithms. The algorithms are designed to divide us. I've said that before. Watch the the documentary on social media. I'm slipping on the name of it, but the Social Network. Are we done? The algorithms divide us so severely. They put what you like to see and what you don't like to see, they keep away. So each side becomes more convinced of their own little isolated truth. Tim Cook, the Apple CEO, has said that. These algorithms have created the division. Are they inherently there? I don't know. Maybe we'll switch the algorithms. We'll adapt. Technology can adapt. But at the end of the day, it isn't going away. We're living with it. So here's the question. Thank you for saying that this is a good level-headed conversation. So here's where we go with this, guys, because I've said before, got a populist movement. It's happening, and populism is driven by people. And social media feeds populism better than anything, left or right, extreme or not extreme. It feeds it, and populist movements push up. And with social media, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's happening. We're having a populist revolution. It's just which way it's going to go. So here's what I want to leave you with this. Back in the 90s, Tom Wolfe wrote a book called The Right Stuff about the Apollo, about the Mercury 7 astronauts. And it was the first astronauts who were going to go into space and the Apollo program. And it became a movie in 1993. Got a movie poster here with a bunch of movie stars in it. The Right Stuff. And then just recently, Disney Plus put out a series based on the book and the 7 astronauts who again become like rock stars. They're the Mercury 7, and they're the first 7, and one of them is going to go to space. And if you know history, you might recognize some of their names. John Glenn was the first guy to orbit the Earth. He became a senator for years. Neil Armstrong wasn't one of them, first guy to walk on the moon. Alan Shepard who's the guy who's famous for hitting the golf ball on the moon. The picture of him, there's Alan Shepard. And Alan Shepard was like, his biographer said he was like Don Draper from Mad Men in a spacesuit. Like, he was that guy, like super cool, deep down full of all kinds of pain and anguish, and lived a very conflicted life. That's another story. But just kind of a represented like, we will get there, ultra competitive. Like, and in the show, they have this little, it might be apocryphal story where he's with one of his daughters and she's been adopted, and he has her put the flag up and he says, you know what this represents? And she says, America. He says, you know what else it represents? It represents an idea, the idea that you can choose what you want to be. And I think we've made a mistake of getting stuck in this notion that freedom in America and the flag is all about the government versus my liberties. Yeah, we're in that, the government versus my liberties. Yes, that's a fair battle. But we've gotten stuck in that versus kind of, I just want to say like almost a bigger idea. Government versus liberty. But what if the bigger idea was about a choice we get to make about how we want to see our future? Who do we want to be individually and collectively? And social media opens that platform up for us in a way, and it's untamed, but it's up to us to tame it. This is not apocryphal. Alan Shepard became the first American in space. And he is sitting in his little capsule ready to go, Freedom 7. 3 weeks earlier, the Soviets put the first man in space in the space race. And the Americans are pissed they didn't get it, but they had problem after problem after problem after problem. So here's Alan Shepard sitting in the capsule, going to be the first guy to go into space, and they're having more problems. 21 rockets have blown up. So they're worried. They don't want one to blow up that actually has the guy in it. The whole world's watching. They've messed up on 21. They can't seem to get it right. They want to get it right. They've got a man in there. And he's got to make it around and go into space, be the first American in space. And Alan Shepard's sitting there, tired. Hours and hours go by. He literally pees in his spacesuit sitting upside down because he's like, I can't hold it any longer. They're like, go ahead and pee. And the urine goes in and just sits around his back and head while he's like lying there. He's going to go into space covered in pee. And he's frustrated. And he says to Mission Control, just fix your little problem and light this candle. And people were like, it was a classic line. It's like, you know what? We all say things aren't rocket science. This was rocket science. They're like, we got to get this right. He's like, just fix the little problem. I'm tired of this, and light this candle and let's go. Well, they did. And he became the first American to go to space. And he became one of the first, he was on Apollo 11, the first moon landing. I used to say years ago, no fear. I had a sticker on my motorcycle helmet. That was like my kind of motto. And I decided today, I think I'm going to take pieces of both of those. No fear. Light this candle. It's up to us, guys. We can do this. We can create the future we want to create, and we can use social media to do it. We can be the Karens, or we can be the Alan Shepards. We can be the haters, or we can be the Alan Shepards. It's up to us. So I'm saying, want to do this? Let's light this candle. It's Rob Nelson Live. Thanks for watching.